Awesome. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Um, I was gonna start up. So the first question is just like an icebreaker one, and it is. What is an interesting time or observation that you've had at Tinker?
What observation did I have?
Time or
Okay,
observation?
okay, I see.
What's a good moment?
Oh man. Okay, one of my favorites right now is this woman came in off the street looking for just a glass of wine on a Thursday night. And we were running the event, but it doesn't take up the whole space, so people can come in and order regular service. She sat down at the bar, and I was like, what are you doing tonight? This is running in part of the space. Do you want to participate? And she's like, what's it about? And I told her, and then I went and grabbed like a little paint marker and a piece of paper. And I was like, see if this makes you happy, and I'll be back in a few minutes. And when I came back, she had like her glass of wine and was just like scribbling madly on this piece of paper. And she was like, oh, I'm sticking around. What do you need from me? And then as the night went on, she found out that there was an open mic portion of the night. She was like, I'll throw my name on. And I was like, awesome, great, add you to the list. And she gets up and she starts by kind of just like humming and riffing and scatting and just making noises and figuring out what the room is gonna respond to her. And she goes, okay, I have an original song that I'm gonna write and perform for you guys. And it's been sitting in this part of my brain, and it came up and she starts telling the story. And then she belts out a song and the whole room goes like totally quiet, takes it in. They're like snapping, they're cheering, they're hollering, and it's just like the most powerful witnessing of this person, unassuming, came to join and just stepped into this experience. And the whole room was like screaming and cheering for her. She started crying. She's like, I've never done something like this before. And everyone was like, where do we find your music? Where do we find more of you? Like, oh my God. And it was just the most magical experience. And things like that are happening every time the event goes up. Just someone coming in and stepping into it and seeing what happens, and people just receiving them with so much love and excitement for what they're able to do. Yeah, that's like one of my favorite Tinker moments.
Beautiful. So let's start with background. What is Tinker? Who are you? What was your interest in creating a space like Tinker and the space for people?
Okay. Tinker is a community creative space that is a bi-weekly event that people can drop into, where we host, I have to get better at like saying this really efficiently. It's a creative space where people can come and work on projects that they have pre-existing if they want to continue writing something or go through a revision on something they have, or they can pick up materials that we have available and start a new art project with markers or collage materials or whatever they might have. And then the event also hosts kind of a share and tell or an open mic feature, so that if people have performance elements in their work or they're wanting to share and get feedback, that there's a portion of the night that hosts feedback and sharing and performance a little bit as well. So at large, it's a creative space where there's no pressure to have something perfect or finished, and we come together and we make and we try things and we connect in places where otherwise maybe we would be hiding in our bedrooms or our apartments or our offices and not practicing creativity. My name is Allison. I am 23 years old. I've been living in Toronto for 5-6 years now. I moved here from Vancouver to do a degree in like graphic communications, technology, and printing and commercial business, and have always been creatively driven, but also very operations and how does it work and driven to make things happen beyond just creative practice. And so I have always been interested in event structures and how to make something come together and how to make something impactful and bringing people together, and whether that was like a conference or an event through school or like a theater show with friends, figuring out that magic when people come together has always been really exciting for me. And at the beginning of this year, I was talking with someone who had a script that was like 85% done, and it had been 85% done for quite a while. She was like, I need feedback. I need some time on my calendar. I need to get it done. And I had just come from talking with another friend who was like, oh, I don't have any time to make art this year. We gotta find some time on the calendar to put some like studio time in, or like join a class or something, but they're so expensive. More and more people in my life, creatives, recent grads, working creatives, they were all like reaching for an element of needing feedback, needing time, needing access to creativity. And so this idea just kind of came where I was like, I could be the person that finds space for those things to happen in community, because I'd like to be the person to figure out how to make those things happen. And so I just kind of challenged myself to figure out how to put up an event that would make that happen.
How did you make that happen?
I have a little tiny bit of experience in event marketing and branding and planning with, again, like conferences and things. And so I just challenged myself to figure it out. And that meant talking to a lot of wonderful creatives that I had in my own personal network. And so I talked to singers who had done shows at local venues in the last year. And there's a performer named Holly Clausius who challenged herself to do like 11 or 12 different shows last year in different venues, bringing on different collaborators. And so I called on her and asked who she liked working with, and where they were accessible, and what venues felt like the right possible place for this. And she led me to a couple of really great options. And then I talked to other people about branding strategy and what they would want from a creative space, and just got a sense from a bunch of different people across different sectors that I had immediate access to see what they might want. I started pulling that information, and then using my understanding of marketing and branding and planning and those pieces, started building out the framework for it. And then I went and talked to Alex, the owner of Bampot, and pitched the idea, and he was the first person I talked to about space, and was like, this is my idea, would your space be willing? And he was like, hell yeah, let's put it in the calendar, do you want to do it next week? And I was like, at this point it was maybe late January, early February, and I'd been working on it for like 2 or 3 weeks, but I was like, I am not ready to see this go up a week from now, but we set a date for March 7th, and that was the first one. So I spent 6 weeks planning it and selling tickets and getting people informed and curious and finding out what they would want from it so that I could make it like an accessible and flexible space. And created my own marketing material and used social media and word of mouth, and that's how the first one went up.
Nice. And you mentioned a lot about your network here. So I guess what role does like support and network come into that creation of Tinker, and what parts of it were your own capacity? How did you find and navigate that balance?
I have always sought to make the people around me really happy, and have always also been really fascinated by like the power of collaborating and knowing each other's strengths. And so when this opportunity came up, I knew I had to challenge myself to make decisions and be capable of being the final decision and exercise my own independence to get stuff done. But I also knew that there was a lot of power in finding out what people around me could help with, knew about, wanted, etc. And so through the years, I've like made friends with different artists and different creatives, and reaching out to them for a coffee was like, it felt, I guess, like research, but it also was just a conversation about how they were doing. And they were really supportive of the idea and were like, yes, and I'll be there. And that was really awesome. But it was also the first time that I was my own client in a creative project, where I was pushing something out into the world that didn't have a higher power or someone external saying it's good or it's bad. So I had to have a lot of faith in myself that I was making the right call. And even just like calling it the right thing, I was so nervous, and I was asking everyone what they thought and what the name should be for this event. And it's like, it doesn't really matter. But it did to me, it did matter what it was called, and it came down to a couple of different choices. And the one that I ended up choosing, there were people in my life who were like, oh, I don't know, and like making that decision independently and sticking to my gut was a really important lesson for me as well. And that played through on a couple of different elements throughout building it.
I'm not sure about you, I definitely know when I'm doing stuff that I can consider a solo project, like I can get stuck in my head or held up, or something that someone else maybe like just move on. I'd be like, no, I have to spend a lot of time and mental power work on this. Did you have those moments, and how did you get through them?
I knew that the creative process, I have so many half-finished projects because I was worried about making them perfect, right? And like paintings sitting at 60% or like photo albums not fully edited because, oh, they're not quite right yet. I'll get back to them when I have time. So with Tinker, it was really important to me to push forward through that uncertainty. And even though it wasn't perfect or finished, to like let it be good enough and move on. And I think that's also kind of Tinker's energy as a whole, is that you show up and it might be unfinished or it might be clunky, but you're showing up, you're doing something about it, you're trying, and it puts you that much closer towards whatever your end goal is than had you not. And so by pushing forward and setting the date for the first one, I was like, we're doing this no matter what. We're gonna find out what happens when you like stumble through it. And the Tinker name has an asterisk beside it, like in the graphics and the posters and stuff, there's an asterisk. Because it's like, if people hate this, I'll change it, I guess. Like I'll roll over and adjust. But by making the decision and committing to it and pushing forward, I got to the event, I got there, and people were like, great name. And you're just like, okay, right, this didn't have to be perfect, because we chose something and we moved on it, and now everyone's here, and that's awesome. So it was such a fantastic lesson in not getting stuck in the weeds on perfection and just seeing what happens when you like stumble through. Yeah.
What are some of the achievements you've gained?
Tinker is so new. There aren't like grandiose achievements, and I don't know that there ever will be, but in terms of like qualitative things, I'm seeing people come together from different disciplines and different communities, and they are befriending each other, they are collaborating on projects, they feel safe coming into a space and trying something that they've never tried before. And I guess that's like a huge, every time that happens at the event, I'm like, that's a huge win. Every time someone gets up at the mic and they're like, never done this before, but here goes this, like that feels so huge that they are excited and feel safe to explore and experiment in the space. So that's my best achievement thus far, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and has it been, is it less than 6 months?
Yes, I think if our first one was in March, then we are only in 4 months of Tinker. Yeah. Is that math right? I think so. Yeah, this upcoming one will be Tinker number 9, I believe, across 4 months, yeah.
What are some of the impacts that Tinker and the space of Tinker has had on the people who visit it?
I get so excited talking about this part. So large broad answer first is that people are finding permission to explore mediums or like hobbies that they haven't before, or they're meeting friends and building relationships with their community that they haven't before. Someone came to the first one interested in face paint, and somebody saw them face painting and was like, can I hire you for a conference that I have later this year? And so right away, the first Tinker already allowed someone else to be hired for their creative pursuits. And that was like so exciting right off the bat. Now there are people collaborating and working on upcoming projects together. People are creating new work out of the relationships that they found at Tinker. People are performing, they're doing their first open mic at Tinker and then going on to other venues and bars with more formal music structures and taking stabs at music there. Are there any other like really magical ones? Maybe. Just like people meeting each other and becoming significant characters in each other's lives as well outside of art. There are friendships and roommates and things happening like that, which is gorgeous. Yeah, there's a lot. I think there's a lot happening, and I may not even be privy to some of it right now. So.
What are some challenges you've faced?
Keeping up with something outside of a full-time job. And keeping it consistent and making sure that it's accessible and fun and that you're showing up with the same amount of energy to it every single time, I think is challenging. It forces you to be consistent. It forces you to commit to something and give it the amount of energy that you owe it for it to be successful. There was one 2 or 3 ago where I was just burnt out, and it's like I've started building a community to help me host it and help me run it. But at that point, it was just me. And so when my energy was struggling because of my life, I didn't give anything to that community that night, and it just felt so flat and uninspiring, and it lacked the magic that I wanted to have. And so that was a wake-up call to say, hey, if you want this to be successful, you have to show up with energy and with 100% of what you can, so that people can walk away with what they're meant to, which also means calling on other friends and people who have enjoyed the space to contribute back to it, which has been really rewarding, and learning that you don't have to do it all solo. That's one element for sure. And then figuring out how to keep an event like that sustainable, I guess, at large, not just from the emotional or energy levels, but from like the structures and financial and community levels as well. I thought about the idea of making Tinker a business and making something that I could then put more energy into because it was more sustaining for me as well. But the beauty of Tinker is that it is so accessible at like $5 an entry a night, just to keep it sustainable and cover the material costs, that it doesn't make sense to try and change that into a business just yet, or at all. So that's one of the things that I'm like challenged, percolating on, figuring out how to scale it, make it richer and more exciting for people, while also navigating the levels that it's operating within right now.
That's so interesting, and there are like definitely two ways that like this conversation can branch now. I'm really excited to hear about burnout, which I feel like is a terrible topic, but one that if you're creating projects, you're like, oh my god, I'm so invested, and then you're like, oh my god, I must help you. So how was burnout for you? How did it come about, and how did you start to solve it?
I think I've definitely experienced different levels of burnout in my life so far. And this most recent example of Tinker burnout was not the biggest one. And I was able to recognize, energy levels are low, and I was able to just take that weekend and recover relatively. But there are also larger chapters of my life where I was just completely unmotivated to make any advancement or any extra thing, and it felt very like bare minimum, which is not how I normally operate. Working until the point of collapse has been a pattern that used to work for me a while ago, and it so doesn't anymore and isn't sustainable. So I think just like learning yourself, and when you're about to start maxing out, finding that support and community, and figuring out where to redelegate the weight of whatever you're carrying, because there's no reason why something like this would have to be the reason that I'm burnt out at the end of the day. There's definitely enough support and community and interest and self-sustaining nature that, it doesn't have to fall on one person, and it doesn't have to be the reason that I'm like completely drained at the end of the day. I'm hoping to prevent burnout by not sewering myself in the first place, and being realistic about what's possible alone, and what's possible in a day. Like not overscoping a project so hard or in a week or whatever that you're setting yourself up for failure before you've even tried. Was there a second part to that question that I had forgotten?
You mentioned as well, like challenges and structural challenges. You're just 4 months in, so I'm not assuming that like you've solved everything you had. Would be interesting to know at this stage, like, what are some of those challenges? Have you started to deal with some of them already? Where's your head?
I think there's definitely a couple that are being like worked through in iteration right now. So there's the people, there's some equipment stuff, and maybe I'll just jump and see if I can answer both. But my previous experience with events and getting people in the door for something and marketing and creating that was for like one-time events. And so this is the first time that we're seeing a returning community time and time again. Like there are a lot of repeat people who use this as one of their regular social things that they're doing every couple of weeks. And so with that, the people that come are the same time and time again, and there are relationships building and expectations building, and it's not like strangers every time. There are people who are getting closer and closer and closer. And so how do you navigate enduring relationships and people who are friends now and building relationships within this event, and using this event space as their time with friends, with people who are coming in new, and how do you make sure that they get the same quality experience, and how do you make sure that they feel as familiar to the room as the people who've been here 10 times over. And so navigating some of the like politics and relationships and stuff within the space is really new to me, and I'm learning as much as I can, as quickly as I can, about structures and how do you make new people feel so excited and safe, and how do you not police people who have been there and are comfortable in that space from like monopolizing any particular part of the experience. That's definitely a curious thing that I'm exploring, and I don't have solutions for, but I'm witnessing and learning as I go. And then with like equipment and material challenges and space challenges, like it's a limited space, and I think figuring out how to create equal access to a larger group of people might be interesting in the future. We're not selling out days in advance or anything now, but I wonder what that will look like. If more people are interested, or if like we have to time it or something so that everyone can get the access they want to it. And then more like little challenges, like people who are based in visual mediums like photography or film, how do we get them in a place where they can present work without like a $3,000 projector or a $300 projector? And so the answer is like, I can't do that right now, but I would love to be able to do that in the future and have the infrastructure to kind of accommodate more and more mediums. So things like that are like, oh, how do we accommodate for that kind of art? Or, oh, how do we create a space for those kinds of creatives? And what would make that more enticing or a more accessible experience here? Like those kinds of technical challenges are being worked on, but no major roadblocks yet, no major limitations, just kind of an in progress.
So you already mentioned that you have like a supportive community, but if there was one thing the community could support you more on, what would that be?
Oh, interesting. I don't know. I think there are some really wonderful folks who have experienced Tinker and then aligned themselves with it and have gone out of their way to fill in gaps that I didn't necessarily ask for help filling in, but they saw that there was an opportunity to help, and they have. People showing up early to help like set up gear or help carry stuff home. There are people that I'm so grateful for that are looking out for the event and looking out for me without me having asked for it, because I'm not very good at asking for it, I think. So I don't know what my answer is to that. They're kind of blind spots maybe, but I am really grateful for the people who are seeing what I am not and stepping in without being asked. Those are incredible people.
How does this city support the work that you do? And do you think that Toronto is an easy or hard place to create something like Tinker?
Toronto's massive, and I don't know that I've been here long enough or really explored all the nooks and crannies to speak to the whole city. But I know that in this area, particularly when I was looking for spaces, even just online as a removed, virtual research thing, a lot of places are inaccessible. A lot of places that aren't even using their space after hours rented it out for like hundreds of dollars. So accessible programming like this, it didn't look like it was going to be feasible in a lot of different circumstances. And so by talking to Alex at Bandpot, and he gave us the space for free, that opened doors that I wasn't seeing opened anywhere else. And so certain places and certain businesses and certain people absolutely believe in creativity and community and collaboration and accessibility in these spaces. And so businesses like Bamfot opening their doors and prioritizing that and letting that happen in their space matters a lot. But I don't know if the city at large is embodying that behavior, or even this area at large. I think there are a lot of small little things happening in corners and crevices around the city, and creatives figuring out how to make it work. And there's some really cool funding opportunities for certain types of certain creatives to get stuff done. But I guess there's always room for it to get a lot better. Yeah.
If there is one thing this city could do to make it easier to create this kind of work, what would it be?
Whoa, again with the what do I imagine would look better. Maybe more like funding options for nonprofit based space. Like I know there are like project based grants, and there are like support people who've dedicated their entire lives to this kind of work grants. But I think Tinker kind of maybe falls in the middle, and I'm curious about the resources that community programming could find. But I also don't want to speak from a place like I've looked everywhere and haven't found anything. I think there's more research for me to do as well and find out. Yeah.
Looking back, I guess not back too far, but looking back in creating the environments and creating Tinker, what would you change and what would you keep?
Whoa. I was really concerned about defining what it was before it had even happened. Like all of my language that I had written to describe what the event was it was so loaded and I think I could trust myself a little bit more that it was gonna play out okay, and maybe worry less about covering all my bases and just kind of let it grow organically. I am really excited with how it has kind of responded to who comes, and the people who show up get to ask for what they want next, and so there's kind of a really organic, not like a call and response, but communication of the event responding to who comes to it, and I think that's really gorgeous. And like just taking the pressure off and letting it be like a really, really, really low stakes thing for myself included, because I'm pitching this space that is low stakes for people to come and create in, while also putting a lot of pressure on myself to make it a successful low stakes event. But other than that, and other than like, we're currently iterating what we call the open mic, because maybe the open mic is too far on the like polished and performing end of things, and we want it to be more like, I found this cool rock on the side of the road and I'm gonna tell the room about it because I'm practicing talking in front of the room. So we're moving like certain language around, but right now I don't have any like major changes or things that I would do differently, because it's all iterative and experimental. What?
You mentioned burnout earlier, and you just mentioned high pressure.
Yes.
How are you working through this?
How am I working through this?
Yeah. Or maybe if someone was in your position, they were like, I've just created something that's called, I don't know, Blinker. And it's sort of stress. And I am stressing out all the time. What advice would you give them?
I think it's appropriate to match the like reasonable level of stress with the level of value that something offers you, or offers, period. And so unfortunately my value category is like, I adore Tinker and I really want it to be special, and so it sits so high on like how I care about it and that I want it to be successful for so many different reasons. But I think there's so much merit in like figuring out what you need and asking for help, or bringing the pressure off a little bit and letting what is going to happen. And like I was saying earlier, like keeping consistent is one of the things that this requires to be successful. So figuring out ways to have people help you keep it consistent, right? Like there are probably different things that I could do to implement some consistency in the event, in the marketing and the media that goes out around the event that I don't have to personally carry, but I'm also figuring out how to ask for that help or what that would look like. Because just because it sits that high for me doesn't mean that I can necessarily expect it to sit that high for other people. Yeah, but I hear what you're saying. There's a lot of pressure that I'm putting on myself to make it happen, which across my whole life I'm navigating chilling out a little bit.
What is next for you and Tinker?
I'm curious about what people will continue to ask for from Tinker. Curious about who comes in the door and what kind of art the event might host. This summer upcoming, I'm trying to schedule them a little bit more in advance so that it's less last minute, which helps me, and it also helps folks know what they're getting into or maybe anticipate things a little bit more, and there's a bit more of like a long-term vision for it. In the fall, there's some really wonderful people coming in to do workshops and more like guided access to either academic levels of creativity that they wouldn't have access to or material access that they wouldn't have access to, and I'm really excited to continue creating opportunities through Tinker for people. I'm excited to see what happens when this community has known each other for a year and they want to make something bigger together. I'm curious if Tinker will survive in this space, if it can grow to another space, if there can be multiple Tinkers happening in different areas across the city with different hosts and different people like using the structure for themselves in their own neighborhoods. Like I think it's so hyper local right now that there's so much opportunity for another cafe on the beaches to pick it up, or like another area downtown, right? And it could just serve 40 people at a time in this little area and start creating way better neighborhoods that are creatively connected. Those are my like immediate future. What's next for Tinker? Yeah.
Yes. One more question.
Okay.
If there is something that we as facilitators should be paying attention to in terms of how we relate to people, what should that be?
I think personally, my assumption or expectation about who is going to walk in the door of the event that I planned versus who has found it and who has consistently shown up for it and loved it aren't necessarily the same people. And so as a facilitator, widening my appreciation and understanding of the diversity of just different thinkers and types of people who will come and benefit from something that you create if you make it available to them is really exciting and important. And that there's like so much opportunity to connect and learn and collaborate with the people around you through as much as a simple conversation. Hey, what are you working on? What are you excited about?